Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, Executive Editor of ClassicsToday.com, here with a cautionary tale of how stupid musicology, unleavened by any kind of musical sympathy or insight, can wreck a masterpiece, a piece we know well, a piece that everybody knows the way it's supposed to go. I'm talking about Mahler's First Symphony, and specifically the double bass solo at the beginning of the third movement. Now, as you know, the third movement of Mahler's First Symphony begins with the minor key German version of the tune Frère Jacques. In German, this tune is called Bruder Martin. His name isn't Jack, it's Martin. I have no idea why, but it's Bruder Martin, what's going on? What's going on? Get up and go kill something. Get up and go kill something. Because it's German, so the words are a little different. You know what I mean? But the point is that Mahler takes this tune, twists it around, and makes it a grotesque funeral march. And the whole point of him doing this is the irony and grotesquerie of the setting, right? So that's why he used a solo double bass, because a solo double bass, especially in Mahler's own day, playing this tune in a relatively high position is going to sound kind of creaky and weird and odd. It's a lot like the very high bassoon solo that opens the Rite of Spring, where you take a normal expected sound and use it in an odd way and push the instrument to make a noise it's not used to making, so that the whole thing has an otherworldly sound. Here's the way it's supposed to sound, basically. This is I just picked this one out because it's on Nexus and I have the rights to play it. The Slovak Philharmonic was Zdeněk Kozler. Not a bad performance, actually. Not terribly well recorded, but it's you know, it's Mahler, right? Here, listen. All right, so that's what it's supposed to sound like. We've all heard it 100 billion million times. Enter the international, here we have them here, I have it here, the fabulous Internationalen Gustav Mahler Gesellschaft Wien, these morons who have decided that we need more critical editions of Mahler symphonies. You know, I talked about this in a previous video. These organizations are a joke. They are basically sort of like foundations or government subsidized or something, and they keep publishing the same crap over and over and over again with little tweaky twiddlies between versions, because that way they get to keep stuff in print, which means that publishers get to keep making royalties and they get to have jobs as musicologists. You know, it's just an absurdity. It really is. So what happened with Mahler's First Symphony? Here's the deal. The Internationalen Gustav Mahler Gesellschaft Wien decided to do a new critical edition of the First Symphony. Why? Because Mahler played the piece relatively many times. There may have been a few details that didn't make it into the last critical edition. There's already been one. And there were a couple printed editions in Mahler's lifetime. So there's plenty of editions. And all of them are slightly different. And about none of them do we know exactly what Mahler's intentions were, other than what was published and, you know, what was in the original manuscripts, that if we have them, and that's it. So with respect to this particular passage, it turns out that for reasons nobody really knows, and an entirely demented concatenation of unconvincing arguments, at one point Mahler may have, first of all, played that passage by all of the double basses in unison, or there were publication errors where the solo indication may have been missing, I don't know. I don't care. Everyone has always played it correctly since Mahler's day. Bruno Walter, who knew Mahler, who recorded the symphony at least twice and left live recordings of other versions of it as well, always used a solo double bass. Since the dawn of time, everyone has always used a solo double bass. Tracts have been written on Mahler's orchestration talking about the genius of his using the solo double bass. Why? Because it's so wonderfully in character with the spirit of the music, and because it makes so much sense in terms of Mahler's instrumental practice, and because he never, ever in any piece he ever wrote indicated solo when he didn't mean one solo should play a solo. He never said a solo is not a solo, but tell that to Sander Wilkins, the editor of the new critical edition of Mahler's First Symphony. He writes, and here it is, it's right here, down here where I write this like no exclamation point. That's me. Here he writes, right? Where you see asterisk solo der Kontrabassgruppe nicht, what is it? It's nicht des Ein-Kontrabasses. Then he writes, siehe auch Revisionsbericht. I mean, take a look at his revision commentary. No. It's moronic. It's stupid. It's so not what Mahler wanted. And everyone has always known that. But what happens? Here's the point. What happens? What happens is that the mindless automata who are these editors who have not a shred of feeling for Mahler's music, including the head of this organization, Reinhold Kubik, who was an early music guy, and for some reason is now running the Mahler show, they publish this nonsense. And because they publish this nonsense, and because conductors want to have the latest information and also tend not to be terribly reflective, I mean, I feel for conductors. I mean, in these days, you know, they give much too much weight to what musicologists do. And sometimes that's right. I mean, sometimes, when Phil Gossett does, Verdi and Rossini original, critical editions, you know that there's a certain level of musical analytical thought that goes into them, and care in sifting through sources. But even more than that, sympathy for what the composer wants, knowledge of the composer's idiom, something which has not been terribly in evidence from the International Gustav Mahler Gesellschaft Wien, whatever the hell it's called. I mean, they messed up Mahler 6 by reversing the inner movements. They've done all kinds of stupid things just for the sake of republishing Mahler scores. So in this particular case, he wrote that horrible footnote, and many recorded performances have since been issued where conductors simply do what the score says, despite the fact that it's demonstrably wrong and musically just not right. Anyway, so that's what happened when Marin Alsop recorded Mahler's First Symphony here with the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, and here is what it sounds like. And compare that to the original, just in close proximity, so you can tell. See what I mean? When the whole group plays it, you get this smooth, warm, charming tune, and all of the interesting, creepy timbre and texture are gone. They're just gone. Now, is there a way to make an entire group of them play it in the way Mahler probably intended, with the right character? Probably there is. I don't know. But it would take a lot of work, and it's not necessary. But there's another way. There's another fascinating way we can get at the heart, not of what the textual issues are, but rather what Mahler had in mind, the character of the music. And that's to look at the original passage in the original version of the symphony, way back when Mahler wrote it in the 1880s. He wrote, remember when this was a symphonic poem in 5 parts called Titan, and the 5th movement, the Blumina movement, was still in there, and the orchestra was a lot smaller. And, you know, he wrote this movement, and instead of having a solo double bass, he had a solo double bass doubled by a solo cello. And that's a slightly different idea. But we learned something from that. We learned, first of all, that it was a solo passage from the get-go, that Mahler conceived it as solo strings, even if there are 2 of them in octaves or in unison or whatever they were in, as opposed to just 1 string instrument. It was 2, but they were solo. So that tells us something right away. But there's more to it than that, because the question then becomes, where do we think Mahler got the idea to use that kind of sound? Was it original with Mahler? Was it part of his admitted orchestral genius? Or was it something that he subsumed from another place and turned to his own purposes? It turns out it was not original to Mahler. Here, listen to this. Now, do you know what that is? That's Act 1, Scene 2 of Verdi's Rigoletto, the duet between Rigoletto and Sparafucili. And there you have that wonderful Mahlerian sound. You have solo double bass, solo cello, and underneath there's a bass drum going thump, 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 with like a heartbeat rhythm. That is what I believe was undoubtedly in Mahler's mind when he wrote the original version of this passage in his First Symphony. The model, as for so much in early Mahler that everybody ignores, and I did a video all about this too, was the sound of Verdi's orchestration in Italian opera, which most Mahler scholars ignore. Why? Because they're not interested in Italian opera, because they're not interested in Italian music, because they're interested in German music, because of all the nationalistic folderol that historically accompanies these musicological investigations. But the truth is that Mahler was, first of all, we all know, hugely eclectic in subsuming every influence he could get his hands on into his own music. And second of all, this is the music he conducted, especially around the time when he was, leading up to the point where he wrote the First Symphony. I mean, he was working in all of these provincial theaters, and then finally he got to Budapest. But, and later Hamburg, but he was playing Italian opera, and he knew these scores backwards, forwards, and sideways, and he admired them. He admired them very much, and he saw these interesting sort of orchestral habits, and he adopted them. And one of the ones that he adopted is the solo cello and solo double bass playing dark, sleazy, kind of creepy, claustrophobic sounding music from that second scene of Verdi's Rigoletto. Because remember, when Rigoletto meets Sparafucili, it's in a disgusting back alley of the city, right? He's going to his home, which is in a poor quarter, and he's going to find a murderer and a thief, in his lair. And so, the setting is so similar to the kind of atmosphere that Mahler was trying to evoke when he was writing the Funeral March in his First Symphony. And so I really, really think that this is an example of what happens when musicologists have no feeling for music. None whatsoever. And what's more, they're working within a very, very narrow, delimited aspect of the composer's musical universe. Mahler is so much bigger than Sander Wilkins and Kubik, who, by the way, has since repudiated this. But it was published, and it's out there, and people are doing it. Because who follows up? Who knows that it has since been repudiated? Kubik, expressed a thought that it may be that this particular decision might call into question the reliability of the critical edition more generally. Yeah, big surprise, right? Because Mahler people, real Mahler people, heard this and they all went, no, that's wrong. That's so stupid. How could you do that to Mahler's First Symphony? Good question, right? So in closing, let me just say, nothing substitutes for genuine sympathy for the composer and his idiom, number one. And number two, that we have to look not just at the details of the score, the publication history of a work, and the internal evidence. You have to look at the world in which the composer worked and in which he lived, and where his inspiration actually came from. Because a lot of this we know, or we can know, but the ability of any scholar or any musicologist to have a useful insight or comment usefully on a text is going to be based on that musicologist's own prejudices and biases and inclinations and limitations. And if you're a German music scholar or a Mahler fan who only cares about the intricacies of Mahler's publication histories, or maybe marginal notes, or maybe what he did in every single performance he ever played of something, and you don't give a damn about what he did as a conductor and what influenced him, and you don't like any other kind of music, and you don't pay attention to any other kind of music, you don't pay attention to the music that Mahler himself knew, then you're useless. Completely useless. And this is a proof positive of just what happens when that kind of uselessness masquerades as musical scholarship. And we, you and me, the people who listen to this stuff carefully, who know it, who love it, and who have an open mind to the wider world in which Mahler operated, it's up to us to police these people and tell them when they've gone too far. And that's why, folks, we have to keep on listening, and not just to Mahler, but to the things that Mahler listened to, because that's how we get closest to the spirit of the composer himself. Thank you so much. I hope you found this talk interesting.